Hi, everybody. Hi, how are you? Thank you for being here. I have some of your questions here. We're going to get to them. They're going to wave at me 20 minutes before we're done so we can get some of these questions in. And I can read the handwriting, so we're all good there. Hello, Nicholas. How are you?
I'm great. So happy to be here. I get to talk to Lena Waithe, you guys.
I mean, the honor is all mine because we're talking about someone. Yes, I'm wearing a T-shirt. I thought I was like, is this too on the nose? But I didn't care. Yes, I wear it, I wear it anyway. No, I mean, I was very honored to read the book early, and I was really nervous about having to write a blurb because, it's hard to summarize how significant the book is. It's hard to summarize how spiritual the journey is that we go on, that you take us on, of his life. And Baldwin is such just an important figure is an understatement. He is someone that I think, I look to for guidance, not just in terms as a writer, but as a human being. So with that said, I wanted to ask you, what did you learn about yourself while learning about this incredible human being?
Well, since I've been reading him and writing about him for almost 30 years, I would say that I've learned like almost everything, certainly a political education, and that took me my whole life.
Yeah, yes, please. What I think I really picked up on, and I didn't realize that I wasn't doing this, but I think some of us think of Baldwin as a sort of a figure to worship. And when you worship a human being, you forget their humanity. And I think what you do is you bring his humanity. I think I was texting you a little bit when I was like reading it, just because I was seeing a person, not just sort of a deity, not just someone to worship and put on a pedestal. And I think a big part of that were the letters. But also what I loved was the frustration he would feel sometimes in the letters, and some of these love letters to different lovers or people, of saying, you said you were gonna come and you didn't, or why haven't you written me back yet, or, I'm not sending any money. Like, what I'm saying? It was like, I've texted that, to people. And I think that it really, because sometimes you feel sad for him, sometimes you feel embarrassed. Sometimes you feel like, oh, I can't imagine the loneliness that he must have felt. And I'm just curious, were you, as you were seeing these things, and you obviously made the decision to put it into the book, what were you thinking about and what were you trying to convey to us while you were inserting the particular letters that you did?
Well, in a way, I wasn't looking to convey anything. I was trying to create a space for him to convey himself, right? I didn't come in with an agenda, If I had any agenda, it was like, I want us to see him as the full human being that he was, who had struggles, who had joy too. I mean, there's this narrative sometimes that Baldwin had this tragic life. I sent it to Lena Waithe, and then I'm getting like audios from her, like as she's reading it. It's just an incredible experience that I'll never forget.
Well, I mean, yeah, I had, because there was just like throwing me. And I think a very personal thing that I was experiencing at the time, because it wasn't public yet, but that I had, well, you know this because you came to a reading of my first play. And it was a very interesting step to step into that realm, and very vulnerable. And I, who was a person who thought I knew everything there was to know about Baldwin, I didn't know that he really dreamed about being not just an essayist, not just a novelist, but a playwright. And reading that, I was sort of blown away by that connection, because you want to feel connected to the people that you follow. And I'm wondering, what were you thinking about when writing that part of the book? Because he also, I don't want to say he failed. I don't think he failed as a playwright. I think if he were sitting here, he might disagree with that. But what I love so much about the way you present it in the book is that obviously he really was passionate about writing a play, particularly the one, The Welcome Table. But he becomes friends with Lorraine Hansberry, who liked his play. She enjoyed it. She went to a reading. Yeah. And it wasn't exactly everything I think he wanted it to be. But she knew there was something there. And what I love about it is, like, she tells him, well, I'm writing a play. And, and he's like, okay, and of course she writes the play to end all plays. The play that I still go back to and look at, and I also love, obviously, his essay, Sweet Lorraine, where he talks about that play and why that play defines us as a society. So that being said, what were you thinking about when writing about his playwright era, as I call it?
Well, Lorraine, first of all, this play is amazing. I saw early versions of it. It's like a queer Waiting for Godot with 3 incredible actresses. It's amazing. So I'm excited for that.
Thank you. But I'm just grateful to know that Baldwin too was trying his hardest to be. Yes, it is hard as hell trying to write a play.
Yeah. So he actually went to Sidney Poitier gave him his house seats to see A Raisin in the Sun when it was in reviews in Philadelphia. So that was pretty amazing.
Like, what is this world? What is this life?
This was before Baldwin was that big, actually. This was early on. I mean, I think seeing Lorraine Hansberry's success really fired him up. I mean, he really was excited to see what could be done with Black life on stage, and really helped lead to Blues for Mr. Charlie and The Odd Man Corner. But
that's why I was so moved by it.
Yeah, but his life, his junior high school yearbook, it says what he wants to be when he grows up is a playwright. And then it says below it, the quote is, "Fame is the spur, but ouch."
Different language, too.
Sorry?
Wasn't he doing a different language?
It was in Turkish.
Right.
Yes. I mean, it was incredible. He didn't speak Turkish.
I'm assuming people have read the book. If you haven't, I'm so sorry. I don't, if there's spoilers and whatnot, but still, you'll still be surprised when you get to that part in the book.
But the reason it was so meaningful to him actually is that he had just come recently from L.A. and not to diss L.A. at all.
Please don't.
But
come on.
He had a horrible experience. He came out here to write the screenplay for Columbia Pictures for Malcolm X.
I know.
And they tried to cast Charlton Heston as Malcolm X.
I know.
We'll just pause for a second.
I know. It really fucked me up because I was like, because I also know if Baldwin, you pray if Baldwin could have met my ass, he would have been like, I don't know how you figured this out, baby. I don't know how you navigating this shit. But it is also depressing as fuck when reading that, because you go like, I would have loved if he could have gotten an opportunity to really write a screenplay or have that freedom to do that. And so that's why that part of the book is, to me, very heartbreaking, his experience with Hollywood.
Yeah, Hollywood, I mean, he swallowed some pills and thought about taking his own life. It was such a horrible experience. Also, Martin Luther King had just been assassinated. And he got the phone call from somebody who I think is in the audience today, so I want to give a shout out to David Moses, Baldwin's collaborator and dear friend. There he is.
Hello.
There he is.
You raise your hand. Thank you for being here.
Well, David was also on stage with him at Carnegie Hall and Ray Charles, I believe, in the 70s, doing a play. The play, kind of a mix of jazz and drama. So just such a pleasure to have you here tonight.
Yes,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Blues for Mr. Charlie was also a very important play to him. I mean, that was a really rough time in his life. That play was so political, and it really, one of his best play. I think it's an excellent play.
Thank you so much for talking about that part of his life. I do want to go back a little bit because I feel like, yes, he wrote movie reviews, which are really amazing. If you don't have the book, The Price of the Ticket, yes, if you don't have that, please get it. It's a collection of a lot of his work, some reviews, a lot of essays, things like that. But I think, fell in love with Baldwin first as an essayist. Those were some of the first things I read, and before I got to the novels, which I think is kind of an interesting way to discover him. I think a lot of people know the novels, and the novels are beautiful, but I think what I like about the essays is his personality jumping out at you. You can't help it. You can hear his voice when you read his essays. When you were, I'm sure obviously you were going back and revisiting them, what are some of your favorite essays of his? I know I have mine. I have my, definitely Sweet Lorraine for sure is up there. And I think this quote, I believe, is also from one of the essays that sticks with me, and I'm also curious what you think about it, where he says, "Heroes are meant to be destroyed." I know. I read that and still trying to make sense of it, and it hits me again and again and again. And that's the thing. Some of his sentences, some of his words, you have to live a little bit for you to really be able to digest them. But I'm just curious, from the essays for you, what are some that jump out, and what did you learn about him from some of those pieces that I call personality pieces, really?
Listen, Baldwin was the greatest essayist of the 20th century, so to pick a favorite is very difficult. You know, of course, The Fire Next Time is a classic. Notes of a Native Son is a classic. But in this book, I was interested in, particularly interested in No Name in the Street, because of his later work that was really important, sort of the post-civil rights moment. But also some of his short, beautiful essay on the painter Buford Delaney. It's just 2 pages. Buford Delaney, for those of you who don't know, is this very important painter, black painter, who was Baldwin's mentor. He wasn't speaking about love in a sexual sense. He was speaking in this much broader sense, the same way he talked about love in The Fire Next Time, the same way he talked about it elsewhere. So that's one essay. Another essay that I found that nobody had ever really read, that was published, was, you know, he was great at writing about people he knew and about artists like Lorraine. And he wrote about an essay about his friend and collaborator and lover, Yoran Kazak.
That's interesting. I want to talk about, there's really beautiful images of Baldwin, many, but some of my favorite images are of him amongst the people. And you also mentioned about fame and how I think there's a lot of frustrating things about it, but I think, and I also relate to this element too, is that I want to be just another person in the crowd so I can observe it, so I can be a part of it, so I can then write about it. And Baldwin, I think, did kind of toe the line in that people knew who he was, but there was an element I feel, and I found looking at the book as well, is that people felt like he was one of them, even though they knew he was special. And you know what, because he would go down, he would be in Europe, but then something would happen and he would go to down south, and he would go to the churches, and obviously would interview Martin Luther King Jr. and liked him, and obviously would talk to Malcolm X. And I'm just curious for you, why was that so important to him, to kind of let the fame be away from him a little bit, because he needed to be one of the people, and he also was. He was affected by what was happening in the world, but he needed to be able to write about it, and he had to do it within the crowd.
Well, he had those sort of 2 poles to his personality. So he moved to France in part to get away from the racism and all of that, and sort of his best friend committing suicide, and to become a writer. But he really hated New York.
Yeah.
Like, he did not want to be in New York. So, you know, that was his push and pull.
Man, it's like, but I think that's the classic writer's struggle. You know, you want to be at the party, but you know you have a deadline to meet. There's also the movie. Geez, it is like a movie. The book makes me think about capitalism, because when you think about Baldwin, you know that he is on a different kind of mission, and it really is, I believe, to leave us all with an inheritance, which is his work. And the thing that you can tell in the letters and things like that, Baldwin is frustrated about the idea of needing to take care of himself, like with money. And it's frustrating for me to read, because and he does get grants and he does do artist, residencies that comes up throughout the book. But it is frustrating that all he wants to do is just sit at a typewriter with a cigarette and write. But you have to have capital to be carefree. And I'm curious, when you were writing about this and documenting it, what was that like for you? Was that hitting you as well? Because I know you weren't trying to have that agenda, but for me, I could not help but to have that beat in my head about the fact that he was dealing with that while trying to leave us a beautiful inheritance.
I mean, I was so broke while I was writing most of this book that when I was reading the parts of him being broke, I was like, okay, I understand. I can get into it. I can explain this. And I was getting another grant so I could, thank you to the Schomburg, thank you to the Leon Levy Center for Biography. These places, I could never have written this book without that kind of support. So I did kind of understand before he hit it big, and he was going through a terrible breakup, and he ran up, for them, a huge phone bill. Right, and Yaddo, as artist residencies goes, it was the first one to integrate, right? So it had Langston Hughes went there, others, but there were still these they still looked at African American artists differently. They were watching them differently, especially male ones. And so they made a big deal over this phone bill. Now it was a big phone bill, but this is James Baldwin, and he already had he'd already written Go Tell It on the Mountain. He was already, it's like, so. So, but money was not his priority. It was a means to an end. Right. He did want to have a nice house in the south of France, though.
True, which he, eventually got there, it's interesting because I think having a better understanding about his love life gave me a better understanding about his work. Were you, as you were diving into these stories, it almost feels like you are reading someone's diary when looking at these letters and getting a better understanding of him. Do you feel like the love story exposes the work in a new way, or do you want people to go back and revisit the work after knowing a little bit more about what he was going through in his personal life at the time in which he was writing it?
Both. I mean, all four of these relationships were with men that he dedicated novels to and or who he collaborated with very specifically. So I felt like to understand his creative process, it was important to look at their relationships. Buford in particular, his spiritual father, they were lifelong friends, right? You couldn't really understand Baldwin's concept of love, his concept of how to see the world without Buford. Lucien, he dedicated Giovanni's Room to him, his second novel, but his first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, Baldwin moved to Paris. He could not finish this novel. He couldn't even come up with a title. So Lucien is 17 years old, and he's kind of penniless and moved to Paris to become an artist. But his parents have some money and some like a chalet in the Swiss Alps. So Lucien pretends he has tuberculosis and gets his father to give them that place for months over a course of a year and a half, and the work and understanding the depth of who Baldwin was as a person.
I think that's what it does for me. It gives me, because I enjoy the novels without knowing that, but knowing it sort of makes them sort of dance in a different way for me. Because then you realize, like any other writer, it's like, I'm going to put what your lovers, your exes, into the work. Because you also, in a way, want them to know what they meant to you and what you did what they did to you as well.
Beale Street is a perfect example. I mean, that great movie by Barry Jenkins, but it's based on, he dedicates it to Joran Kazak. So that love affair is based on Baldwin's love affair, and that's what I was trying to get at.
Right. It's also interesting because him, obviously, as a queer person, he knows how to write straight people, because I believe that queer folks know straight people better than they know themselves.
Just like he could write white people better than they could write themselves.
Black folk know white people because we have to. Speaking of the queerness, I will. Oh my God, I love this. This is such a good group. Here's the thing about, I think, when you're a queer person in the world, you see the world differently because you do not abide by society's rules. You just can't. And what is interesting about him and his peers And there was some that respected him. Obviously, you know what happened with Richard Wright. There was some interesting energies that were happening. And I think Baldwin understood this, is that he was able to actually see the world more clearly than his peers. They were seeing it in black and white. And he could see the world in color. And I think there was a resentment because of that. And I think they actually didn't understand why they were resenting him. And as you were, and I think he knew that they didn't understand why there was a frustration toward him. And what I appreciate is that he wasn't afraid to say, no, there's a new way to look at the world, and you guys are looking at it in a very simple way. What did you discover about how he had to break away from the pack after even being praised by them? And he had to shun that peer group. And I'm sure that also was not easy, and also I think spoke to his loneliness. But I am grateful that he was willing to be a lone soldier, so that way we could all see the world in color rather than continuing to write it and paint it in black and white.
I love that you said that he sees it in color, because I think that's so true. It's his children's book, Little Man, that helped bring back into print.
Yes, and we're very grateful.
It was all about, showing these different shades of the children's skin colors, right? It's a beautiful book for that reason. But now I forgot your question.
No. He was able to see the world differently because I believe he was queer, and his peers.
Oh, he was always an outsider. So he wrote "Go Tell It on the Mountain," and then people expected him, especially the white literary establishment, but the black literary establishment too, expected him to write a sequel. But what did he do? He said, "That's fine. I'll take it over to Europe," and he took it over to England. And he sold it there. Turned around, Dial Press back in the States wanted to buy it, and now it's probably the most important classic gay novel of all time.
Or novel in general, one of the most important novels in general.
Exactly. Yeah. So, together like lovers in order to change the world.
Yes.
He's being metaphorical, but then he gets literal in another country in a certain sense, and he shows just how messy that is. You have to read his nonfiction and his fiction together, in my opinion. I agree. In order to understand them and not put them in a hierarchy that people do. I love that you love the novels, but many people don't think that much of them. But I think a lot of them, I think especially After Another Country, which is a great novel. Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Gone was ahead of its time in how it was exploring black queer love, black fame. That was set out here in Hollywood. And then his final novel, Just Above My Head, is a masterpiece. I mean, people are starting to say that now and understand that.
Yes, and I want to get into the criticism just in general, but I did want to touch on, as I listen to his interviews, I'll send you some every now and there, and they're like his speaking engagements. Seriously, go to YouTube. They will speak to you as if he is hitting right today in 2025. Like it is not, doesn't feel dated at all. But what he talked about was like, to love is to modify. Yeah, he was talking about our society and the Negro problem, if you will, at the time. But it's teaching me so much just about love romantically, even though he's talking about it, how we need to love each other as a society. And he really, the thing that Baldwin always say teaches me, or always say Baldwin says, or Baldwin says this, but he really did not believe in race. He's like, this is not real. This is a scam. And he was saying that then. And you see, obviously, he's doing these interviews and he's on these morning shows and sitting next to Harry Belafonte and everybody else. And they're talking about the Negro problem. And he's like...
That's a white problem, actually.
Right. Because he's like, it's not real. And I think that, and also because he was in interracial relationships, not all of them, but some of them. And I think that is why he was able to say that. And yet we still struggle with when you see whether they be queer or not. There is this thing that we can't get over, this odd hump that we can't move past about love being not political. Love is not political at all. It is guttural, it is spiritual, it is godly. And Baldwin understood that. And I think he must have been frustrated that the world could not understand it. Now I want to go talk about criticism real quickly. He talks about it being like soul crushing because some of his books, obviously he began as a critical darling, and then it turned, as it always does, And obviously we know that his work has stood the test of time. He wrote very eloquently about how some black folks weren't fans of Raisin in the Sun, but how he talked about how that play was not for the generation it was put in front of, but for those that had not been born yet. Yep. What would you say about how he had to be a human and deal with people feeling as if his work was passé?
Well, the good news is by the time his last novel came out in 1979, and the New York Times was sort of asking him about that, and he said, all the great artists are judged after their time, sort of like what you were just saying. So I think he had come to some peace with that later in his life, in 1979. By then.
Oh, that's real. And my last question before I get to some of you guys' questions, or really observation that I made, and I think this is one of the voice notes I sent you. I love when he sits down with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And he goes and he's like sitting at the table with all of them, he's is sort of welcomed in, and there's this element of them wondering, like, are you one of us, brother? Are you gonna come over here? And he sits comfortably in his skin. And basically they ask him, like, well, what religion do you belong to? And he says, I'm a writer. And I hit you because I am a person who was raised by lazy Christians, as I like to call them. They only go to church on Mother's Day and Easter, sometimes Palm Sundays. But it's like Oprah talks about her mom would go to church because she wanted people to think she was a Christian. She didn't behave as one. But Baldwin, I kind of in that moment was enlightened, and I realized that is his belief system. That is what he believes in, the typewriter. That is where he worships. And he also worships humanity, and he believed in it, and he wanted to understand it as best he could. And I think you do a really beautiful job of helping us see how much he wanted for us as a society. He wanted us to be our best selves. And he grew up in a time in which we were at our worst. And I think he would also be just as disappointed and frustrated and disturbed by the lack of humanity that sometimes shows up in our world. But he also would say, like he does so beautifully as he sits across from Nikki Giovanni, and he says, I'm an optimist because I'm alive. Yeah. And with that, I'm gonna go to y'all's questions. Okay, this is a question I really like. Is it Dougie? Dougie? Okay, Dougie. Okay. It says, if the book was to burn today, and that's not a crazy notion, what chapter would you want to save?
I would have to save, I'll tell you a section that I would save.
Okay, yeah, a section, because it's a section.
So, I discovered the out-of-print children's book, and then I discovered that the artist was alive. Everybody thought he was dead. This was 1990, this was 2003.
Oh, yeah.
And I went over and interviewed him in Paris, and he was Baldwin's sort of last great love and collaborator, and he died in 2005. And I was really trying to understand the texture of their relationship. He dedicated If Beale Street Could Talk to him. And then in 2018, I went to visit his wife, and she finds a 7-page love poem, unpublished, that Baldwin wrote to her husband. And it's 45 years old. And she read it out loud to me, translating it back from the French into English, because her husband didn't speak English, so Baldwin wrote it in French. And it was just it was sort of what I had been looking for 20 years. I was looking for this evidence, the evidence of things not seen. I was looking for this evidence of their relationship, and through it, this window into Baldwin as a human being, and what was sort of moving him to create his art, both on political levels, aesthetic levels, but also personal levels. So I could not lose that part of the book, because it'd be like losing that love poem twice.
That's really good. That's beautiful. Yeah. I'm gonna ask this one. What was your biggest surprise that you uncovered during your research?
Guys have tough questions tonight. This is
know,
like this
I like
LA
it, I like it, I
crowd.
like it.
They want like the one. That's the tough question when there can only be
I mean, you
one.
can give us a couple.
I mean, one of the things, but I'm not going to use this one as my one, but is just how related the fiction and the nonfiction are. Baldwin was incredibly close with his family, and one of his nephews, Hakeem Wilson, and his wife, Rochelle, are here tonight, so shout out.
Yes. Hello, 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 hello. Thank you for being here.
But he had to create, spent most of his life abroad, so he had to create these alternative kinship structures, and he did that in France. But what he created in Istanbul, how people would come up to Baldwin on the street and say, I met you last night, but you were asleep on her lap. So, you know, and that one thing I tried to convey in this book is that Baldwin lived a difficult life because those were difficult times, but he also had a lot of joy and love and community in his life.
Yeah, no, you do a really beautiful job with that. Before I get to what I did want to ask you, can you speak a little bit about music and his relationship to it? I love that you help us, because you're painting a picture for us of these moments in his life when he's at with an artist residency, or he's in a small place in like Istanbul, or if he's somewhere in Europe. But there's always a record player, and he's always listening to songs, sometimes the same one again and again and again. Can you speak to how important it was for you to include that element in the book?
Yeah, he always said that, you know, it was when he discovered that black music was his language, not necessarily the history of American literature, that he found his voice. He was talking about Bessie Smith. But, you know, he also, when he was living in Istanbul, he lived in a house for a period down by the water, and his friend, the blues singer Bertice Redding, would come over, and they would sing the blues together late at night.
Yeah. It also makes me want to speak to his relationship to black women. Baldwin was very much I think there's an interesting thing in our society, because we live in a patriarchal society. That's not an opinion, it's a fact. And we oftentimes ignore the feminine. And what I love about the images we see, whether it be or videos of him talking to Maya Angelou, or the image of him and Nina Simone dancing, the archival footage we have of him in conversation with Nikki Giovanni, obviously his relationship with Lorraine Hansberry, and the list goes on and on and on. But he was not afraid of the feminine. And he was willing to listen to black women. And I think it is one of the reasons why he lived such a joyful life, because he understood that the hierarchy we had was incorrect.
I think it was a journey for him. I mean, his journey to self-love was very complicated because he grew up being told he was ugly and all this stuff. But he used that journey to self-love to kind of talk about America's trouble with love. Lena Horne, Nina Simone. I mean, the list goes on and on.
So long, like
important
he had so many sisters.
Black women writers, Gail Jones, he supported her career. But this was a journey for him. And one thing that I also really admire about Baldwin was that he was willing to change his mind.
Yes.
Which is also such an important lesson. So he was not always perfect when it came to feminism, for example. But he listened. He talked to Nikki Giovanni. He talked to Audre Lorde.
Absolutely. And you also witness him do that in the conversation with Nikki Giovanni. It is one of my favorite elements of it.
Smoke a few cigarettes along the way.
Oh yeah, of course. Of course. You know, I like when he lights a cigarette for her as well. But yes, you see him sort of saying, I see where you're coming from. I understand. What is your first memory of James Baldwin? No one wrote their name on this one. This is a really good question. Sorry.
That's a good one. Because you know, Baldwin often wrote in his later essays. Another thing I admire about him, he'd say, "I don't trust my memory." You know, he talks about a lot of it was blotted out, and he uses the untrustworthiness of memory as a kind of way into his essays. I do remember the first time I saw his face. It was a drawing. I went to the D.C. public schools. My 8th grade English teacher, Mrs. Miles, had drawings of famous black writers all over the cracked walls, and James Baldwin was one of them. And I remember his eyes. She said, "Oh no, Nick. You got dressed up in a suit and you came in and gave a presentation on Baldwin's entire life in the 8th grade." Wow. But I completely repressed it because I've also completely repressed the process of writing this book, you know, so I repressed it. So that was And then I stole my twin sister's copy of Giovanni's Room the next year, never gave it back, and read it. And then it was in college, that I really took a class where I read everything by him.
Beautiful. Last question. If you could want us to know one thing about James Baldwin, what would it be?
There's a jazz song called James Baldwin to the Rescue, and this is the moment where I want him to rescue me.
That's a great answer. Thank you, everyone. Please get the book if you haven't already. It's worth your time. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Nicholas, for writing this. Thank you for all the hours. I said this to you already, but thank you for all the hours, the sacrifice, the time, the passion, the commitment. This is now our new inheritance, and we are forever grateful.
It's an honor. It's an honor.
Thank you both very much.